Good evening. I'm Ed Henry in tonight again for Tucker Carlson. And sometimes you just have to give President Obama credit where credit is due. Bear with me on this. Today, the president's aides say he took bold, aggressive action against Russia, ordering sanctions in retaliation against alleged Russian interference in the 2016 race. Sure, there are skeptics wondering whether the president, who along with his one-time Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, of course, pushed that button on the Russian reset and is now just trying to look tough and salvage some kind of legacy on the way out the door. This is where the credit comes in. I mean, I also covered the previous presidential race in 2012, and the president was way, way ahead of the curve in calling out Russia as a major national security threat, right? Right? Wait, it was the other guy? But hang on, there was like a presidential debate, so the White House must know we have it on tape.
Russia, I indicated, is a geopolitical foe. Not a,
Number one,
excuse me, it's a geopolitical foe. And I said in the same paragraph, I said, and Iran is the greatest national security threat we face.
Oh, right. Okay. It was Mitt Romney, the Republican, who was ahead of the curve. But this was a debate, as I said. Both guys got to talk, obviously. So when the president got called on, he clearly had his 30 or 60 seconds to chime in and agree with Romney, right? I mean, we probably have that on tape, too.
in the 1980s are now calling to ask for their foreign policy back because, the Cold War's been over for 20 years.
Ouch, that's gotta hurt. The president said burn on them while it took 4 years. Now it looks like Russia maybe getting the last laugh. Not only is Russian President Vladimir Putin vowing to retaliate, his diplomats are openly mocking Mr. Obama. The Russian embassy in London tweeted this: President Obama expels 35 Russian diplomats in Cold War deja vu, as everybody, including the American people, will be glad to see the last of this hapless administration. Oh, and look, they even drew a little picture for Mr. Obama. Yeah, such a pretty picture of a lame duck. Ouch. In a moment, we'll dig deeper on the substance of these sanctions and whether they are as tough as the White House claims. Plus, we'll go live to Palm Beach to see what the next president, Donald Trump, has to say about all of this. He just spoke out a few moments ago. But first, let's chew over the political stakes with Daniel Halper. He's the Washington bureau chief, of course, at the New York Post, and Betsy Woodruff, politics reporter at the Daily Beast. Daniel, let's start with you. The president has only 22 days left in office. He just dropped this stink bomb at the UN over Israel. Now this. How much of this is muddying the waters, at least a little bit, for President-elect Trump?
Well, it certainly puts President Trump into a bind, right? He will have to make an immediate decision whether to continue this Israel policy that President Obama has put in place. We already know he has made that decision. We presume, based on his statements, that he will not continue. And on the Russia issue, he has to make a decision on whether or not to keep these sanctions and these actions in place or whether or not to roll them back. That, I think, is a little more up in the air, and we don't really know how he'll act.
Betsy, today the Speaker of the House, Republican Paul Ryan, was blistering in saying, quote, while today's action by the administration is overdue, it is an appropriate way to end 8 years of failed policy with Russia. And it serves as a prime example of this administration's ineffective foreign policy that has left America weaker in the eyes of the world. That's his say. Donald Trump, though, also will have some explaining to do, because if he comes into office and rips away these sanctions and looks like he's favoring Russia, that puts him in a pickle as well.
Exactly, yeah. And of course, Trump has made clear over the course of his campaign, his time in public life, that he's much more sympathetic to Russia, and particularly to Vladimir Putin, than most Republican, I would say basically all influential Republican leaders are. That statement from Paul Ryan, in it, he also suggested that Russia was acting to countervene with the United States' national interests, that what it's trying to do is going against the good of our country. Of course, that sounded very much like a direct echo of the tape you just played of Romney back in 2012. So Paul Ryan and Mitt Romney are very much on the same page about this, while, of course, Donald Trump is taking a different view. He's made that clear. So the big question that we can expect him to get asked until he answers it over the next couple of weeks is, what's he going to do about these sanctions? Is he going to make a major break from both Obama's view and from the view of some Republican leaders? Or is he going to try to ease into the thaw of our relations with Russia?
And Daniel, there's another big question for Barack Obama as well. Is he going to go quietly off into the sunset, or is he going to continue this even beyond his time in office? Karl Rove had a piece today in the Wall Street Journal saying, quote, President Obama signaled how he's likely to conduct himself once out of office. He's referring to some interviews he's done. Whiny, self-justifying, and bursting with excuses. Mr. Obama will be the first ex-president since Woodrow Wilson to remain in Washington. Given the tone of his interviews recently, he could well become a carping, persistent presence in our nation's capital. George W. Bush had the good sense to say, look, I'm done, and walk off the stage, Daniel. It appears, in this case, Barack Obama's not going away quietly.
Yeah, look, obviously we can't predict his future actions, but his present actions do suggest that he will be here for a while. What's interesting about these actions on the Israel issue and both on the Russian issue, they seem like the repudiations of the Obama foreign policy, the lead from behind type of foreign policy that he so famously, I guess lived by for while he was president of the United States. He's not doing that now, it seems. He's taking the lead on Israel, changing his policy toward Israel, and on Russia, he's obviously doing these actions. But of course, even on Israel, he still abstained on the vote. So the analogy doesn't quite work out. It's not a full repudiation. Sure. He abstained on the vote, didn't vote his conscience. And on this issue, on Russia, it's a retaliatory issue. It's a retaliatory action, and it's based on actions that he alleges that Russia has done and not based on perceived threats, per se.
Betsy, complicated legacy for Barack Obama, to say the least. I ran through some of it with the Russian reset that certainly appears to have failed, but who can also forget that moment before the 2012 election where he told Dmitry Medvedev, tell Vladimir, transmit this to Vladimir, it was said in the transcript, that after the 2012 election, I'll have a lot more flexibility to work with Vlad.
It almost sounds like it was spoken on a different planet, given how radically things have changed over the last 4 years, the way that the Russian reset sort of reset America's relations with Russia and kind of the opposite of the way that it was initially intended. That's a huge shift. One thing that I think is sort of interesting and curious about the way that Obama's next approach to Russia, of course, is playing out, is that he's actually drawn some criticism or some pushback from members of his own party. Adam Schiff, who's the top Democrat on the House Intel Committee, who's very involved in these issues, has said the sanctions that the president announced today don't go nearly far enough, and that Congress actually needs to push to make them much more serious. He's indicated, some other Democrats have indicated, they think these sanctions are more symbolic than anything else and don't have the teeth necessary to actually change Russia's behavior, to actually deter them.
Good point you make, since other Democrats like Chuck Schumer are also hitting the president, Secretary of State John Kerry, over the Israel situation, so a lot of inter-party fighting right there. We really appreciate it. Betsy, Daniel, your insights tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Ed.
Here now to help fill us in on the rest of the details surrounding the Russian sanctions, Fox News White House correspondent Kevin Corke live in Honolulu. And Kevin, critics are already saying, as you heard, wait, there are not even any hard-hitting economic sanctions here. What is the White House case for why they do have teeth?
Well, you hit the nail on the head. And I talked to Eric Schultz, the principal deputy White House press secretary, just about that very notion. And he said, listen, Kevin, we have to do something to give the Russians a very strong message. What that something looks like to a lot of people is not terribly much, but do keep this in mind, Ed. Now, I think this is relevant for your viewers. A lot of what you and I will see, the sort of public pronouncements, sanctions and things that you can sort of put your arms around. That's just one half of this. There's also the cyber angle that a lot of people won't be talking about. But as far as the things that we have heard about today, 72 hours, that's the amount of time that nearly 36 Russian operatives have to get out of the country. They've been expelled by the Obama administration in retaliation, as you know, for alleged Russian cyber hacking activity in the run-up to the 2016 election. President Obama making a number of points in his statement today. I want to share just part of what he was talking about with your viewers here tonight. The president saying, and I'm quoting now, these actions follow repeated private and public warnings that we've issued to the Russian government and are unnecessary and appropriate response to efforts to harm U.S. interests in violation of established international norms of behavior. He went on to add this: these actions are not the sum total, there it is, of our response to Russia's aggressive activities. We will continue to take a variety of actions at a time and place of our choosing, some of which will not be publicized.
Our bottom line is that what Russia has been engaged in over the last few months and years is unacceptable. It's outside the norms of diplomatic behavior, and the president is sending a message today to tell them to cut it out. That's why he ordered aggressive actions.
Meanwhile, the White House has not been shy about accusing Russian President Vladimir Putin of orchestrating all the hacks, which of course were revealed by the website WikiLeaks that exposed allegations of Democratic Party infighting and a concerted effort, Ed, by senior party officials to boost the candidacy of eventual party nominee Hillary Clinton. Now, for their part, the Russians snapping back immediately today, ridiculing the president in a tweet issued by the UK embassy. I'm glad you talked about it. It was actually pretty interesting. President Obama expels 35 diplomats in a Cold War deja vu. Of course, they went on to call him a lame duck. Now, this is also important, my friend. Experts tell us, yes, you can get your hands around some of the things that you see in person, but it's the cyber power that America will exercise that should have the Russians worried for quite some time to come.
Kevin, Happy New Year a couple days early to you and the entire Fox crew out there in Hawaii. The president's move, announced by the State Department, comes just one day after the current Secretary of State John Kerry doubled down on those attacks against Israel we mentioned, which will make achieving Mideast peace even harder for President-elect Donald Trump. And our next guest, a leading expert on Russia, says these new sanctions are not really aimed at Russia. This move, too, is actually meant to muddy the water some more for Mr. Trump. Stephen Cohn is professor of Russian studies at both NYU and Princeton University. Welcome, Professor. You say this is the president trying to cripple Mr. Trump a bit?
Well, it's one of the things I've said. I'm not sure. I mean, look, we got a really strange situation, and I would say exceedingly dangerous.
Why?
Well, our relationship with Russia is worse than it's been since the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962. And we're taking steps that are going to escalate it, make it worse. On the other hand, they haven't given us any facts about what the Russians actually did. So between this, I would say, semi-hysterical reaction by the American political class and the absence of facts, we don't ask, what's the impact of this going to be on Russia itself?
So what
kind of decisions is it going to produce in Moscow?
So what went wrong? We walked through some of the history, and it appears that Barack Obama, to say the least, in the 2012 campaign, downplayed the idea that Russia was a big political foe.
You don't want to ask me that question. You really don't, because first of all, we need a lot of time. Secondly, I'll commit an act of heresy.
Which is?
I've written a book about American-Russian relations since the end of the Soviet Union. 25 years this month, by the way. Congratulations.
Good way
the
to go.
Soviet Union. Wait, I did a good job. I conclude that we got where we are today in a new and more dangerous Cold War primarily because of American policy, not primarily because of a Russian policy. That does not make me an apologist for the Kremlin. What it makes me is a defender of American national security. So here's the question. Some of your people asked it.
Sure.
To what extent was what Obama did today, and by the way, it's not the sanctions that are dangerous. That's old Cold War stuff.
Right.
It's the covert actions he says are coming next, right? I mean,
Because you think that could blow back against us? That could.
Well, what does he mean? Covert actions, cyber actions against banks, against nuclear control and command facilities, against their radar. I mean, you don't want to make Russians in a state of high anxiety.
And he's doing this on the eve of a transfer of power here in the United States. And add to the mix these reports tonight about Russia brokering a ceasefire on Syria, and President Obama on the sidelines, not part of that, but the Russians are saying to Donald Trump, when you take office, you can join the talks.
Yeah, and that was very interesting. And basically he said, we're not talking to Obama anymore. We will talk to Trump. He can come into this. By the way, we should be talking about this Syrian arrangement because it's extremely important. But we're distracted about this. But here's the question.
But are we distracted on purpose? Because the administration doesn't want to talk about Syria because they haven't been able to deal with that crisis.
You know, I don't know if it's possible, but I think it's likely that an element of this, these measures taken against Russia, particularly the sanctions, are meant to block any Trump-Putin cooperation or détente. I mean, McCain and the others virtually say that. But you got to ask, are the Russians going to retaliate now? I mean, we call what we did retaliation.
Yeah, they say they will.
Yeah, but we don't know until we produce the facts. Obama says he'll produce the facts in a few days, what the Russians actually did.
So your bottom line point tonight is, you've got 30 seconds.
in 30 seconds, we are in an exceedingly dangerous relationship with Russia. There are 3 places fought with actual war: Ukraine, Syria, and of course the Baltic region, where NATO is building up. Escalating now, with everybody talking about nuclear weapons, as Trump did last week. In my lifetime, I don't recall anything as dangerous as we now are going through, with a layer of hysteria in the media.
Yeah.
Everybody demanding that Obama do more.
Welcome to office, Mr. Trump. We appreciate it. Professor Cohen. Thanks for that. You're probably not surprised to learn the mainstream media is already crafting a narrative that says all this will end up undermining the next president as well. The New York Times reporting tonight the sanctions were meant in part to, quote, box in President-elect Donald Trump, who has suggested, quote, the hacking could have been the work of a 400-pound guy lying in his bed, as a way of challenging the CIA's claims that this was all about Russia. Our man at Mar-a-Lago is correspondent Peter Doocy, live tonight again in Palm Beach, Florida. Good evening, Peter.
Good evening, Ed. About an hour ago, we got the first reaction from the president-elect to President Obama's decision to punish the Russian government and expel those diplomats. It came in a written statement that says this: it's time for our country to move on to bigger and better things. Nevertheless, in the interest of our country and its great people, I will meet with leaders of the intelligence community next week in order to be updated on the facts of this situation. So we still don't know, based on that statement, what the next president plans to do about these sanctions, whether he wants to leave them in place or get rid of them. But that statement about saying it's time to move on is completely consistent with what the president-elect said last night on this issue.
I think we ought to get on with our lives. I think that computers have complicated lives very greatly. The whole age of computer has made it where nobody knows exactly what's going on. We have speed, we have a lot of other things, but I'm not sure you have the kind of security that you need.
Something else transition officials said this morning that they have not backed away from is that putting a lot of focus on hacking is just an attempt to delegitimize Mr. Trump's election day victory. That comment, of course, pointed at people on the left. These officials also urging the Obama administration officials to release whatever evidence that they were basing claims of Russian interference off of. We do now expect that in the next few days. However, there has not been a change of position yet. The president-elect, though, keep in mind, does want to be updated with the classified intel in the next few days as well. As far as today at Mar-a-Lago, it was a relatively quiet one. The president-elect huddled with senior staff, but it really shouldn't be too quiet for long because transition officials say there's going to be a flurry of activity here and in New York in the next couple of days as the president-elect appoints the remaining spot, or fills the remaining spots in his cabinet and their deputies, and names ambassadors. We also found out some more today about that phone call that President Obama had with the president-elect yesterday. We're told that they mostly talked about Inauguration Day activities. Until then, though, Ed, and we want to just give you a quick shot, the president-elect is going to be here at Mar-a-Lago, and this is one of the big ballrooms here. It is really a sight to see, and you get a much better sense being inside why it is that the next president likes spending so much time here when he can.
No doubt about it, and you're lucky to do that as well. We appreciate you giving us that little behind-the-scenes tour along with all of those reporting details. Now it is time for Twitter Storm, our nightly forecast of social media's most powerful weather patterns. Tonight, a tornado of tastelessness is sweeping up the ever-controversial Charlie Sheen. Remember this?
I'm by winning. I win here and I win there. Now what? Duh. Winning. I'm sorry. Winning. You starting to get the concept now? Oops. Winning.
Winning. Sound familiar? Well, Sheen is now taking aim at President-elect Trump. Maybe it's a little myth that Mr. Trump has taken that winning line and run with it.
We're going to win so much you're going to get sick and tired of it. You're going to say, Mr. President, we can't take it anymore. You're winning too much. Please, we don't want to win that much anymore. Please, Mr. President, we can't take it. And I'm going to say, I don't care. We're going to keep winning.
Please, Mr. President. That gets me every time. That's funny. Well, it appears Sheen may be more than a little peeved, and this is not funny, about Trump winning the election. Following the deaths of actresses Carrie Fisher and Debbie Reynolds, Sheen actually had the poor taste to tweet this: "Dear God, Trump next, please." He wrote "Trump next, please" several more times. Clever dude. Many in the Twitterverse were clearly not amused. Steve Vaughn said, "That's not winning, that's being a sick person with a sick mind. That goes for the thousands who like this post. Seek help." Janet Catalano tweeted, "How disgusting and low can the Hollywood ignorant people act?" Well, you may be surprised. Just a Navy wife said, quote, "Relax, Charlie Sheen, your prayers answered. Donald Trump is going to be next president of the United States of America." And finally, Sheen's tweet was Gary Andrews' pick for Today in Pomposity. Most pompous thing? Charlie Sheen invoking the name of God while asking to take the life, I think they meant to say, of Donald Trump. Ironic much? Good one, Gary, but chill out a little. We don't get to Today in Pomposity till a little bit later in the show. And trust me, we got some good ones. But keep them coming on Twitter to @EdHenry. For now, that is tonight's Twitter storm. And tonight, a U.S.-led coalition is delivering airstrikes against ISIS targets in Mosul. But haven't we seen this before? Will it really make a difference? Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North is here next with the bottom line. Also, actress Debbie Reynolds passed away just one day after her daughter Carrie Fisher died. The one, the only Larry King is standing by to kibitz a little. And you get to eavesdrop on our conversation coming up. Tonight, the U.S.-led coalition is launching a new offensive in the city of Mosul, the last major stronghold for ISIS in Iraq. But haven't we heard this song before? Will it really make a difference at a time when a top U.S. general is warning it's likely to take at least 2 more years to defeat the terror group? Who better to call on for the real story than Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North? Good to see you, Lieutenant Colonel. What is new today? What do you think that this offensive is going to be different and more productive than the ones we've seen before?
Well, look, we're now in the 3rd month of this fight for the city of Mosul, the 2nd largest city in all Mesopotamia, when all this began 2 years ago. We were there just last month, and we're finishing up the special. It's going to air shortly after the New Year. Only the Peshmerga, the Kurds, have consistently beaten ISIS over the last 2 years. ISIS will eventually, and I want to emphasize that word, eventually be defeated in Mosul. But ISIS isn't going to go away anytime soon. And the problem is that the Obama administration's propaganda, in fact, no offense to you because I've seen the press release, the propaganda about a U.S.-led coalition is fiction. I mean, if it's actually being led, it's done by remote control. And we were there. I mean, you cannot find a U.S. special operator operating forward with the Iraqi Special Operations Forces. There's a handful of allies of French and German folks working with the Peshmerga, but there's darn few Americans anywhere as near the front, and that's the only place you can lead from. So U.S.-led, it's a fiction.
You're bringing
yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. You're bringing an important dose of reality tonight, and you can add in, Kimberly Dozier, who has a great reputation from the Daily Beast, wrote that General Stephen Townsend predicts it will take 2 years of hard work to clear the so-called Islamic State from its twin capitals of Mosul and Raqqa, and then to burn out the remnants that will likely flee to the vast empty desert between Syria and Iraq. So weigh in on that, because I want to be paid. I mean, look, we have to give our military the time that it takes to do this properly and effectively. It doesn't happen overnight, I get that. But remember, this started with President Obama saying ISIS was the JV squad.
Yeah, well, and it got worse from there because we did absolutely nothing of any real substance to help the only people who were beating ISIS, and that's, of course, the Peshmerga. Look at the whole problem with this, and General Townsend's spot on. I know there's going to be a lot of criticism about why can't we go faster. Well, you can't go faster with a limited number of U.S. forces on the ground and without some kind of Sunni backup, because all the problem actually focuses on Syria. How did we get to Syria? Well, we got there with a civil war that began right after the famous speeches about an Arab Spring. This administration, Ed, has created a firestorm in that part of the world. And I think the general, quite frankly, is being optimistic, saying 2 years.
So let's look.
I think what you're going to see is a long-term progress on this thing that's only going to be happening as long as you've got people on the ground like perhaps the Egyptians or the Jordanians, both
Right.
of whom would have gone there as peacekeepers. They're not going to be peacemakers. They can't be.
Last question, I've got 30 seconds. So
Sure.
we've heard the criticism, we've discussed it of President Obama, but moving forward, President-elect Donald Trump has made some big promises about being able to defeat ISIS. Can he actually follow through on that?
Well, he's got the right chairman of the Joint Chiefs in Joe Dunford and the right Secretary of Defense in Jim Mattis. And my hope is that what we're going to end up with is a consensus in Congress to increase the number of troops that are out there, to put ourselves behind the idea of an allied force that's going to go into Syria and keep the peace. You cannot fight this war and expect the ISIS to go away anytime soon. There's going to be more attacks like we saw in Germany just before Christmas. You got the Iranians and the Russians calling the shots. A NATO ally, Turkey, up in arms, and the southern flank of NATO with Incirlik Air Base, all at risk because this administration failed so miserably at their foreign policy.
Some big challenges for President-elect Trump ahead. We appreciate you bringing a reality check tonight, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. And Colonel North, by the way, Happy New Year. Be sure to tune in for War Stories with Ollie North this Sunday night, January 1st. That's starting at 8 p.m. Eastern on Fox Business. Meanwhile, the legendary Larry King is standing by with his thoughts. There he is on the equally legendary Debbie Reynolds and Carrie Fisher, who tragically died within just 24 hours of one another. Of course, he interviewed them both. The reflections of Larry King. That's next. Yeah, Singing in the Rain, the legendary actress Debbie Reynolds passed away last night after an apparent stroke just one day after her daughter, actress Carrie Fisher, also passed. TMZ is reporting that Reynolds' final words to her son were, "I miss her so much, I want to be with Carrie." Stars and fans from around the world were remembering the iconic actress whose career spanned more than 6 decades. Larry King, a legend in his own right, tweeted that Carrie Fisher was a true gem, and then sadly within hours tweeted this as well. Debbie Reynolds was pure class. She was loving, talented, beautiful, unsinkable. I feel sorry for anyone who never got a chance to meet her. Larry, host of the Emmy-nominated Larry King Now, and Politicking with Larry King on Aura.tv joins us now. Great to see you, Larry. And you did have that real wonderful opportunity to meet and interview both of them. Talk about this relationship.
Well, they were very, very close. Debbie was close with her children. She was, by the way, she was a sensational entertainer. If you saw her films, you know how well she could sing and act. But if you never saw her nightclub act, you missed one of the best nightclub shows ever. She did it for an hour and a half. She was a great impressionist. She was hysterically funny. She was wonderful to be around. Speaking of her and her daughter, she denied that Postcards from the Edge that Carrie wrote and that Meryl Streep supposedly played Carrie and Shirley MacLaine played Debbie. Debbie said that was not about her, and she didn't want to see the movie at all.
Yeah.
But she had a great relationship with Carrie. They were very close. Carrie was a chip off the old block in her sense of humor.
Yeah.
She was a little naughtier than her mother. She used language that Debbie never used, but Debbie was that old school show business person. But I had some wonderful times with her off the air and on.
When you talk about how close they were, there's a still photo I saw today. Madonna sent out this tweet, and it was such a moving photo of Carrie just as a little girl looking backstage at her mom on stage, and you can relate to it, any parent-child relationship, not just celebrity. You get beyond that, because this was a complicated relationship. Debbie Reynolds had 3 different husbands who left her. There were a lot of struggles, and in 2010, Carrie Fisher told the New York Times, quote, "If anything, my mother taught me how to thrive. That's my word for it. She would go through these amazingly difficult things, and the message was clear. Doing the impossible is possible. It's just not fun. She broke her ankle one night during a performance and went back on stage and sang Tammy with her foot in a bucket of ice," Larry.
Yeah. I'll tell you some other things. She had that great sense of humor carried through. She had 2 great tragedies. Eddie Fisher left her for Elizabeth Taylor. Later, she and Elizabeth became very friendly. I interviewed Elizabeth and talked about it. Elizabeth had a nickname for Eddie Fisher. She called him Harry Hunter. She would never say his name. She would call him Harry Hunter. And she and Elizabeth put all that aside, and years later they became friends. In fact, we're in a movie. We're in a movie together. Another thing about Debbie, she married Harry Carl, who was a shoe magnate, and he burned up all her money, left them penniless, lost it all in Las Vegas, declared bankruptcy, and she paid everyone back. She worked, it was his bankruptcy, she paid everyone back.
Wow.
Another funny story about Debbie. She and Bob Hope, she did many Bob Hope Christmas specials, traveled with him when he visited troops in Europe, but she first met Bob Hope when she was a little girl.
Yeah.
She lived in the valley near Bob Hope and sold him Girl Scout cookies. And later in life, she would continue to come to his house and sell him Girl Scout cookies.
That's great.
She also would write out jokes. She'd write out jokes, attach it to a rock, and throw it on the lawn. Giving him free jokes to use.
I got a last question,
She
Larry.
was the best.
Yeah, wonderful stories. I've got a minute, and you were spotted here in New York recently at Trump Tower, and a larger-than-life character out there right now is Donald Trump. You've sat down with a lot of presidents of both parties. I don't know if you actually met with him, got a chance to talk to him, but you were at Trump Tower spotted on that elevator cam. Did you talk to him? Whether you did or didn't, what do you expect from him in the first 100 days and beyond?
Well, I interviewed Trump over 30 times. I know him over 30 years. I was walking through the Trump lobby to go get my hair cut. I was just walking through. It was freezing and raining. It was a shortcut. So I stopped and I asked if he was in. He wasn't in the office yet. And then they got all these press around, and they're yelling at me, "What are you here for?" And I said, "I want to be Secretary of the Interior." I don't know what to expect from Donald. He will surprise you. This is guaranteed. Donald Trump is not conventional. I've known 8 presidents. I've known him. He's the president I know the best. I never knew a president closely before they went into office. I would call him a friend. As to what to expect, anything goes with Donald Trump.
That has to be the Larry King story ever. You're going through Trump Tower just to get a haircut, and people think you're going up to be nominated Secretary of Defense or something. The press is chasing you. I love it, Larry. Happy New Year to you and your family. Thanks for coming on.
You too. Thanks.
And 2 million people will head to New York's Times Square for New Year's Eve, barely a block from here on Saturday, to watch the ball drop. But with terror scares, what are officials doing to keep us safe, not just in New York, but around the nation? That's next. Globe, especially ISIS-inspired attacks at large public gatherings like Nice and Berlin, have law enforcement, of course, on high alert ahead of New Year's Eve, especially here in New York City's famed Times Square. Almost 2 million people will be expected to watch the ball drop there. That's where we find our own Rick Leventhal live in Times Square. How's it looking, Rick?
It looks good tonight, Ed, and there may be no more secure place in the world than right here on Saturday night, according to the NYPD commissioner, who says this will be the most policed, best protected event and one of the safest venues on the planet, thanks to all the assets that'll be deployed, including for the first time ever on New Year's Eve, 65 sand and big sanitation trucks. They'll be blocking avenues and cross streets to create a perimeter against any possible vehicle attacks. The NYPD says there will be more checkpoints and stricter controls in place this year, with 7,000 uniformed officers deployed here and at other events across the city, along with plainclothes cops, critical response teams with heavy weapons, snipers on rooftops, police helicopters and boats, explosives detecting canines, and more. Of course, for America's largest police department, securing large events is almost routine, but the boss of the NYPD says that they're fired up and the officers will not be letting their guard down.
How do you guard against complacency? You know what? It's New York City police officers. This is something that we do every day, and they know a few times during the year, 4th of July, New Year's Eve, the tree lighting. This is where everybody's got to be on their toes. I know it's complacency can set in at times, but certainly not in an event like this.
And add a reminder to the 1 to 2 million revelers expected to show up here on Saturday night. No alcohol, no big bags or backpacks, no umbrellas, and once you enter one of the pens they're going to set up here on Broadway or 7th Avenue, you can't leave and get back in, so no bathroom breaks. And some people show up here starting at 8 o'clock in the morning to get the best views of the entertainment in store. It'll be a big night for sure.
Rick, always covering it all for us. Have a safe and a healthy New Year's Eve yourself as well. Celebrities who largely back Hillary Clinton are not lining up to perform at Donald Trump's inauguration. And Bristol Palin, Sarah Palin's daughter, is blasting those so-called A-listers in a blog post. Quote, "Isn't it amazing how not cool it is to be a conservative in the public eye? Either Hollywood is that far off, or we have so many sissies we have in the spotlight too scared to stand for what they believe in." One group that will be lining up for Mr. Trump is the Rockettes. But not all the dancers are happy with the gig. Some on the left say they should not be forced to perform. Doesn't this just show a little bit of liberal hypocrisy? Here now, radio host and columnist Tammy Bruce. You wrote a column about this.
I did.
And you say this is hypocrisy.
Yeah, look, it was pretty obvious when it started. I mean, the Trump election, I think, has highlighted the hypocrisy in general, but also has brought Americans together in a great deal. We've watched for years how, as an example, Christian bakers have been attacked by the gay left, pizza makers who didn't want to cater a wedding as being, discriminatory or should be ruined if you don't conform. And yet suddenly, when the Rockettes say, well, it's against our conscience, or one of them did, we're going to have our feelings hurt and we don't want to do it. And suddenly the left found their conscience and said, yes, this person shouldn't have to do something that offends them. And so this is one of the arguments that the American dynamic of live and let live, that we're all going to be able to deal with ourselves in the marketplace, that we should be able to live our lives as we see fit, and have some sympathy for people as opposed to trying to ruin them if they say they don't want to participate.
Funny, because I didn't hear the same sympathy when, say, the religious conscience came up for the Little Sisters of the Poor during the Obamacare fight.
Yeah, good point. I mean, we've seen this not just when it comes to individuals and weddings, but the Little Sisters of the Poor when it comes to Obamacare, even Hobby Lobby, a company that employs a lot of people. This was, you got to do it because the government says so, and no room for you to live your life as you see fit. But I think that for performers especially, it's disturbing because it's not the Donald Trump inauguration, it's the inauguration of the next president of the United States. And performers, especially in Hollywood, all of America is their audience. Entertainment transcends politics, in all honesty, that the real things that matter, that singers and performers, whether they're rock stars, and some of them are my friends and I've heard from them, they get it that this is really about entertaining all people. But I think I would argue, Ed, it's this culture of snowflakes, of safe spaces, of political correctness that no one...
Get me a blankie.
Yeah, and Madonna, by the way, her Twitter profile shows her sucking her thumb. So that's more than appropriate. But this is where people coming out of university are not well suited for what life is going to hand them, which is sometimes disappointments, and you must bounce back.
You're not always going to get a trophy.
That's right.
But to be fair, liberals have been on social media, and I've seen them, and I'd like to see you answer it, that you mentioned the Baker issue, for example. So now you're saying as conservative, the Rockettes should perform. But when there was a conservative baker in Indiana a couple of years ago who didn't want to bake a cake for a gay couple wedding, you were saying, well, they don't have to bake. You shouldn't force them to do it. So where's the hypocrisy?
Yeah, look, I think that the Rockettes, if there's some that don't want to perform, shouldn't have to. And as a matter of fact, that's how the Radio City Rockette dynamic works. That it's always been voluntary. This has been some fake news that they were going to be forced to do it. You can opt into a project like that, which is appropriate. The one young woman who complained said she was going to cry if she had to do it. Well, now she doesn't have to. She's okay. But
some of them said that the Rockettes will be traumatized if they're forced.
Trauma. Well, look, I think some of that's projection. No one's going to be traumatized. The Rockettes and other performers perform for all kinds of people all the time. As a matter of fact, the tourists in this city, some of whom you see in the windows here,
lined up behind us,
come from states that voted for both Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. They get into the Radio City Music Hall, and the Rockettes are fine with that. They have been. The bottom line is that if you want to be consistent, my message to conservatives and liberals is to have it be both for people of faith and performers, and we'll be in good shape.
Positive message for a happy new year.
Yes.
Good
Thank you. Same to you.
Appreciate you coming in. And most everyone has some kind of New Year's resolution, but somehow Shannon Bream once got tricked into a big resolution, a major one. The inside scoop on our buddy Shannon Bream when she steps into the friend zone next. It's time now for the Friend Zone, where we invite one of our friends from within the building here at Fox in New York or in D.C., for example. Tonight, we're joined by the great Shannon Bream. And Shannon, since you're about the skinniest person I know, we know that unlike the rest of us, losing a few pounds is never your resolution, but your husband tricked you into a big resolution, didn't he?
Well, here's the thing. Mr. Bream does not believe in resolutions. There he is. You can see too, he's got a hollow leg. He eats everything he wants to and works out. But he decided one year in December, going into the next year, he would have the goal of running a marathon. And I thought, that is awesome. He was a college athlete. I had no doubt that he would be able to do this. And so I'm thinking about my plan of like, I'm going to have little posters and signs along the way. I'm going to like t-shirt. I'm coming up with like the logo and the color scheme in my head. And he's like, oh no, we're going to run this together. And I'm thinking, I can't even run down the block. This is crazy. So somehow I got roped into his non-resolution goal for the new year. And 5 months later, we ran the Pittsburgh Marathon.
Together?
Oh yeah. And listen, the deal was, I will only do this if you stay at my pace. And I had all kinds of sneaky plans to back out all along the way. But we got this book that was sort of like an idiot's guide to running a marathon. I promise you it might have been that title. And one of the first things it said was you have to pick a race, sign up for it, and send in your money. So I felt bad about sending in the $35 because I'm like, I'm definitely quitting this at some point. But then it also said you have to tell everybody you know. So we would be in the grocery store, like in the checkout counter at the line, and my husband would be like, by the way, we are running the Pittsburgh Marathon this year. And so we got totally roped into doing it, and I never sort of backed out. But, I lost my toenails. I lost my temper a few times. But somehow we got across that line.
I would have loved to have seen the secret plans for Shannon to get away from the marathon. That would have been a scandal. Shannon sneaking away from the marathon. That's awesome.
I tried, but here's the thing, too, is that towards the end of your running, you really are doing these long runs the last couple of weeks, like 18 miles, 20 miles, which literally I couldn't run a mile when we started this thing. It was sheer willpower and lots of prayers. But I was also under the misconception that after those long runs, you could sit in the tub for the rest of the day and just sort of eat sleeves of Oreos. So I end up being the only idiot you will ever know who actually gained weight while training for a marathon. So there's one picture of me crossing the finish line, and I look like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. I will not ever show anybody, but I did finish the marathon.
So
I've got the medal to prove it.
I love it, and congratulations on that. Quick change of topic here, which is you've got one of those sort of Christmas birthdays. I understand it's a couple of days. Is that a blessing or a curse? Because, the presents are combined and all that.
I loved it. I'm born on the 23rd, and I think my parents took me home on Christmas Day. My middle name was Noel because we had sort of a holiday theme going on. I never knew anything differently, so I love it, and everybody really does try to make an effort of like separate wrapping paper for birthday and Christmas, and it's still, I think, such an exciting festive time. But here's the thing. I've got a brother who's the day after Christmas. Hi, Pete. And I always felt like that was tougher because everybody's already like in a food coma and the presents are over and they're sort of, the buildup is over, but he's got the birthday after Christmas too, so we have a lot of celebrating in December.
Last question, the big question for Shannon Bream. Will you ever run another marathon?
I'm one and done. Listen, that was on my husband's bucket list. We're now over to my bucket list, which doesn't involve any more running of marathons. I do still run, but never, I don't think, 26.2 again. Retired.
Well, congratulations on doing it. Happy New Year to you. And Mr. Bream has a name, Sheldon. So we want to say Happy New Year to him.
Bream.
He's a great guy.
And to you too, Ed.
Thanks. Appreciate it. And coming up, we wanted to know what the most pompous thing you've heard lately was. Your answers are pouring in on Twitter to @EdHenry and Tucker Carlson tonight at FoxNews.com. We'll read some of the best next. I have a sneaking suspicion Secretary of State John Kerry ain't going to like this. And now we bring you Today in Pomposity. We asked, what is the most pompous thing you've heard lately? Mary Johnson tweeted, pick a phrase from John Kerry's speech, any phrase. Yeah. Can't really add anything to that. Amanda Simpson said, Gwyneth Paltrow saying she and Chris Martin contributed something positive to the culture of divorce. JR2 tweeted, anything from Charlie Sheen, Gloria Steinem, or The View. So anti-American, sad, but so smug. And finally, Michael Billion said that Obama would have beaten Donald Trump. It's more likely that Rex Ryan will get another head coaching job than Obama beating Trump. Let me add, Ryan fired now by the Jets and the Buffalo Bills. Sad. And tomorrow, You Choose the News is back. Tweet an important story to me at Ed Henry or email us at tuckercarlsontonight@foxnews.com. That's about it for us tonight. Tune in each night, 7 p.m. Eastern, to the show that is the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, of course, smugness, and groupthink. Don't forget to DVR the show if you haven't set that up already. The O'Reilly Factor is up next. Incoming White House Chief of Staff Reince Priebus is going to step into the no spin zone. Good night. Tucker's back soon, I promise.